Hello everyone. This brief lecture is to talk about your needs assessment paper and what its purpose is. You need to watch the presentation prior to our next meeting. So about the needs assessment provides the reader with proof that there is a need for this program and the population you choose. You need to provide background information about the problem and the population, and you have to have data to support what you're saying. And so it's very similar to a report or a paper you may have written on a topic, but what's critical in this report, as you remember, there's no editorializing or emotional language. It's going to be factual information for the reader, and you're trying to prove that there is a need for this program or this grant or an evaluation at the national level. So that is what you're going to be doing in your first paper. You're going to support your program with evidence that there is a need for the program and the population you're choosing. So what it does is it defines the problem using national data. You have to use reliable and peer-reviewed sources, and we talked about that when we visited the library. You're using secondary data, and that means data that's been collected from someone else. And whatever you put in this paper, it should support the 2 grant goals that you have. And those grant goals come from the grant summary sheet. So here is how you might define the problem or the disease using national data. You'd have to explain what the disease, condition, or illness is, and you need to describe it in prevalence, incidence, morbidity, and mortality at the national level. These are all data that you can get mostly from web pages. You're not likely to get this information from a peer-reviewed article. You're going to have to identify the risk factors, and you're going to have to discuss each of the risk factors in detail with data. You should be able to get this information from the needs assessment outline. Then you might be able to show there's programs that already exist. This is not likely to happen at this point in the semester, but it might happen by the end of the semester. You have to tell who your population is by age, race, geography, and ethnicity. So are they youth? Are they adults? Are they senior citizens? What race or ethnicity are they? Are they African American? Are they Hispanic? Are they Asian? Are they in the geography? Are they from rural areas or urban areas? And then you have to look at, of all that information you provide at a national level, which risk factors are you going to address in your program? These are some examples of reliable sources. So you have reliable peer-reviewed sources, which are journal articles. These are some secondary data from web pages. There is a youth risk behavior surveillance survey, which is done by the CDC every year. So if you're dealing with youth or young adults, that's a survey you might use. CDC has a lot of other surveys, which I may have included on my feedback to you in your needs assessment outline. And if not, we can talk about those when we meet. The Centers for Disease Control and the National Institutes for Health are both good examples of reliable web pages. Any agencies that are identified by your grant, or when you did assignment 1.2, I may have given you some other ideas on the agencies that you should use. Morbidity and Mortality Weekly is a form of data that comes out every week from CDC. And if you have any articles on programming, disease, condition, or population. So when you're looking for web pages, anything that ends in .org, .gov, or .edu, those 3 types of web pages are almost always reliable sources to use. If your web page has something other than .gov, .edu, or .org, then they may not be as reliable and may require you to do some extra research. So the first thing I want you to do when you're preparing to write your needs assessment is I want you to put these headings in your paper, because these are the headings that you are going to be required to use for your needs assessment paper. So let's talk about the types of things you'll discuss in each section. So in the introduction, you might define the disease or condition. You're going to have to describe the problem that's been given to you by the grant, and you're going to have data to support it. So I've put an example of what this might look like using a fictitious disease. So ice creamitis is a leading cause of death in the U.S. That's just a statement that I'm making. I need to follow that with data. In fact, 32% of all deaths are caused by this illness. Citation. According to the author and year, ice creamitis is the leading cause of death for all ethnic groups in the U.S. So as you can see, I've made a statement and then I follow it up with factual data that I can provide that can be cited. And that's how this part of the paper is written. You're going to describe the problem and the population and identify what the risk factors are. You must have epidemiological data in this section on incidence, prevalence, morbidity, and mortality. You will need that information. You might not need all 4 of those, but you probably will need at least 2 or 3 of those. And you're likely going to report data within a racial or ethnic group. You want to be able to compare your group that you're focusing on to another group to show that there is a problem. So for example, and there's 2 examples here, and these are ways to show that there is a need. While black men make up 7% of the U.S. population, they make up 42% of all deaths caused by ice creamitis, and then you cite it. The reason that shows that there is a problem is if black men make up only 7% of the population, you would expect, logically, that they'd make up 7% of all the deaths in this disease. But if they don't, they make up a huge proportion. So that shows there is an issue for this population in ice creamitis. Then another way to show it is to include something like this. While the incident rate is very similar for black and white women, there is a disparity in death rates. I've made a statement, and now I'm going to support it with data. Author and year indicates that death rates of black women with ice creamitis are 72% compared to 42% for white women. So you can compare, in the first situation, population to incidence or mortality. And in the second place, the second example, you can compare incidence between your race or ethnicity or group and the U.S. or another group. So those are 2 ways to show in the introduction that there is a problem or an issue or a need for this topic and your population. At the end of the section, you're going to state the risk factors for this disease are, and you'll list all the risk factors that you have. And then you're going to follow it with a statement that says the risk factors that are covered in this program are. And you're going to identify the 5 risk factors that you're going to address in your program. The next section is called background. And this is where you will discuss each risk factor that you just listed in the prior section. So here you're going to talk about the risk factors in the exact order in which you listed them in the first part of the paper. So here's an example of how to talk about a risk factor. It says, according to CDC 2020, people are more likely to die from ice creamitis if they live in poverty. So that's a factual statement, and I've given my source, which is the Centers for Disease Control. Then I follow it with more data. In the US, 18% of all people live in poverty. However, 41% of all blacks live in poverty, compared to 7% of white, 38% of American Indians, and 15% of Hispanics. And that should be cited as well. And in your needs assessment outline, I gave you ideas on where you could find these type of data. For poverty, or for income or socioeconomic status, other items that can show that are unemployment rates, median income, ownership of homes. At minimum, if you're talking about poverty or socioeconomic status, you need to have the rates of poverty and the median income. Each of your risk factors will be discussed like this, and each risk factor will take 1 to 2 paragraphs to discuss. So if you have 5 risk factors, you're going to have between 5 and 10 paragraphs in this section. And then your goal, as it says in this paper, is to have 5 risk factors. The reason we're starting with 5 is because things are going to be eliminated as you progress through the semester. If in your needs assessment outline I already decreased you to fewer than 5, then use the feedback from the needs assessment outline to make this happen. Now this next section is critical because you're in the very beginning of your research and review of the literature and web pages, and you may not have enough information on everything. So just like in the needs assessment outline, if you don't have enough information or you cannot find information on a risk factor, you need to put that statement in this section. So let's say you have poverty, you're good, education, you're good, attitudes in the community, you haven't found yet. So then you'll put the next risk factor is community attitudes and norms, and then you'll write a sentence that says, I have not been able to find this information yet, or I know the information is there, but I have not gathered it, or I need help finding this information. So that sentence tells me where you are and what kind of assistance you might need. The next part of this paper is goals, and you're going to copy and paste the goals. And the goals are the ones from the grant summary sheet. There are 3 places that you could find the goals listed on this slide: logic model, grant, and grant summary sheet. We're not using the grant this semester because the grant goals in some of the grants are very confusing. So your logic model, if you've done it correctly, should have the 2 goals that are listed in the grant summary sheet. If you didn't do that correctly, then make sure you go to the grant summary sheet and you are going to copy and paste the goals exactly as they are. The next part of your paper is a summary. And there, I use this hamburger analogy, and for you to consider, when you eat a hamburger, the top and bottom of the hamburger are both bread. They're the same thing, but the top of the burger, which is your introduction, is big, and the bottom of your burger is smaller. So the summary should be smaller than the introduction, but because it's quote unquote bread, it should have the same information in it with the same data or similar data. It just needs to be more succinct. So keep that in mind as you write the summary. In reality, that is all that exists in a needs assessment. But I'm asking you to add a couple things. One is the logic model. The logic model must be in landscape. So if you know how to change from portrait to landscape within a paper, then you should put that in the paper. If you don't know how to do that, or you'd prefer not to do that, then the logic model becomes a separate attachment. Then at the very end of this paper, which is not really part of a needs assessment, I just want you to think about this. Which resources do you think you need at this point based on the risk factors you've listed? So you're going to list everything you think you need, and that would include things like money, people, services, um, or anything that you need to buy to make a service happen. I'm grading this to see if you have ideas, and some of these ideas might come from your logic model or from your needs assessment outline. Do you know what you need to do something? So if you have an idea on how to improve access to care, have you identified that here? The only way you can lose points on this part of the paper is if you do not do it or what you have is not related to your grant. So, for example, if you're doing a grant on heart disease and families, and in this list you say you need to buy condoms, that is wrong. You don't need condoms for heart disease program. So that's an example of what you have written here makes no sense. The other thing that might happen is what you have here you haven't put any thought into. So, for example, you have I need people, I need some money to buy some supplies, and I'm going to need supplies. That's a very poor answer to this question because it does not show that you've thought about what you need specific to your program. So when you're writing a good needs assessment, just as a summary, you should use current peer-reviewed literature. Everything must be in your own words. I want no quotations in any of the papers you submit. You need to be thorough and succinct and organize your paper like a burger. You need to plan enough time to write this paper, which you cannot write this paper the day before it's due and do well. And you need to take the time to use APA and correct any English usage issues. APA, you've got feedback on a couple different assignments that you've received back, and you should have purchased a book, and if you did not, then you need to find correct ways to do APA through the web pages. Remember to not use old literature or popular sources like People magazine. That's not appropriate. And old literature, you would have gotten feedback from me if any of your references are too old. Make sure you don't copy and paste items from the article directly into your paper. You'll lose points on that because those are not your words. I want everything put into your words. Do not ramble. This requires you to be extremely organized and succinct, and I've given you examples of how to do that. And again, don't write at the last minute. And if you ignore APA and spelling and grammar, you'll lose points. And those are not points you really should lose at this point in your career. So before writing your paper, gather all of your assignments, which are your annotated bibliographies, your needs assessment outline, and your logic model. Make sure you have those items with you because those are the things you should use primarily to write this paper. You might have to pull out an article because you need something, but if you've done everything correctly, you should be able to write this paper without the articles in front of you. Set up the title page, make sure you've got your headings, and then make sure you use your assignments to write your paper. I'm expecting you to use the feedback I have provided you. If I give you very specific feedback and you ignore it, you will lose points. So that's it for the needs assessment paper. When we meet in small groups, I'd like to talk to you about specific issues related to your grant or specific questions you have or issues you are having finding specific data. I look forward to meeting you in small groups.